Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And welcome to Umlink Energy Speaks Back, powered by Hart. My name is Paul Webb. I'm the founder of B2B Energy and I'm your host. And weekly, I present to you experts from around the world. Welcome to episode 92. And I'm in the UK where I meet with an energy expert who has dedicated his time to education and has developed vast amounts of knowledge from his days in the Merchant Navy. Our purpose, as always, is to provide a good understanding of energy management knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. On our journey of knowledge sharing, we would like to thank our sponsors, and they are Mcneil, who are taking the confusion out of energy management, Arc Systems, renowned for their energy software, Clean Energy Revolution for their knowledge and networking throughout LinkedIn, B2B Energy for the 11-week energy program, Alexis Energy for power management, led by Vision, who are an LED and a controls company, Watts for electronics and EV transition, Carbon Black Global for their waste to energy initiatives, Cinefix for their insulation coating, and SmartCool for their AC initiatives. And lastly, I'd like to thank our certificate partners, Esther Energy. Today's special guest is a true energy expert focusing on education in our sector. So without any further ado, I give you David Mcneil. Good morning, David. How are you this morning?
I'm fine, Paul. Hope you're all right. Are you? Yes?
Yes, very good. And we had a bit of banter this morning when you were saying about, you sent me a message this morning saying you was going for a run and going to get wet. And I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know David was a jogger.
I used to be. But it was a euphemism for a morning shower.
Right. And then when I the penny dropped, as they say. The penny dropped. So David, I'm sure we're going to learn more about your language regarding that and where that comes from later on in the podcast. But obviously, David, you and I have met via LinkedIn. We've never met in person, but we've had quite a few phone calls and chats, and we often share the occasional text message, and we've created this little bit of a bond between us, which I quite enjoy our friendship, actually. And we've threatened one day that we will meet in person, amazingly. So, David, for the benefit of our audience today, can you give us some background to who is David and what's your origin story?
I suppose it probably starts in the Far East. That's where I was born. When I left school, I really had a pretty firm idea about what I wanted to do for a living. So I signed up for an apprenticeship with a major oil company, and they took me on.
Right.
So they took me on as an engineering apprentice, and I spent 4 years in an apprenticeship with them, which was good. I don't think I really realized or appreciated the value of what I'd done at the time. But it turned out, if you look at it now, I completed 2 diplomas and a lot more besides. And then on coming out of that, I was then awarded a contract to go to sea with them as a seagoing engineer on their fleet of oil tankers.
Right.
As it was then.
And was that always the intention to go to sea with them when you was doing the apprenticeship or not?
Oh, that really was. I think that's where I thought I was going to land and stay for the rest of my life.
Right.
I really thought then, this is it. I am here. I've got this job. I'm going to move up in it. I'm going to progress in it, and see where this takes me. And that's exactly how I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
But you and I both know that you go through your life and things change. Your perspective alters. Your perspective changes. Your position changes. Your belief systems alter. And all of a sudden you think, hang on a minute, maybe there's other goals I can aspire to. The trigger for that, I think, was when the company flagged out. And if you remember what happened to the P&O people recently, well, that started with people like us when the companies we work for went offshore, deregistered all their ships from the City of London and put them into other places around the world. And I got kicked out of the pension fund.
Right.
And that's a trigger, because all of a sudden you're thinking, hang on a minute, I joined this fleet, I joined this company because I thought I would get a good pension at the end of it.
Yeah.
And it would indeed have been a good pension. Even now, if you look at it, but because of the way things were done at the time, through the actions of the Thatcher government and what they did, I found myself being given a new contract of employment with the company, but also at the same time kicked out of the pension fund. So I had to do something about that. And I thought, well, how am I going to do this? How am I going to handle this? So I laughingly now, I talk about this now laughingly, but I made the devil's covenant with them, the devil's bargain, if you like.
Right.
The company I work for was very short of staff because people left in droves following that move. And I wanted something desperately from my seagoing experience. So I said, I'll work for you for a year if you give me what I want. And they said, yeah, we'll have some of that. So the only thing I wanted was the endorsement on my certificate of competence for diesel engine ships. So they sent me away for 6 months on a motor vessel, and I got my motor vessel, and I came back and I did my examinations. I got my endorsement on my certificate, which was for steam, and that made it a full chief engineer's certificate of competence.
Right. And
I also had 2 dangerous cargo endorsements. And after that, things happened again. But I thought, well, I've achieved that. I've done that. I've got my combined chiefs. I've got all this, and I've got so much else besides. I thought back to a time when I heard about this chief engineer who was very popular, and he left his ship to go on leave, and he retired at that point. And I went away and I had my leave, and I came back, and I went back to Japan to join my next vessel. And a year later, that man was dead. So I thought to myself, just a minute, to stop and think. I think that one man's death made me rethink the whole of my life. I thought, well, you need some other challenge that really keeps you moving, keeps you working. Because that fellow went from being a very active and very fit gentleman, going home, putting his feet up, getting under his wife's feet, getting on her nerves because she had the house exactly the way she wanted it.
Yeah.
And he had a good pension at the end of it. He was a chief engineer. He'd done very well, but he was dead within the year. So what happens after that? Well, his wife only then gets half the pension to which she would have been otherwise entitled if her husband had been alive. But she's lost her husband. I doubt if he was any more than about 63, 64. Well, no, less than that. I think he would have retired somewhere mid to late 50s. Is that a way to go, Paul?
No, it's not.
I don't think so.
No.
I don't. And that's when I came ashore. I packed up. There are other things I could tell you about, but I'll leave the funny stories out, because that's when my satire kicked in on that occasion.
You're making me laugh already, because you've just told us that story about someone passing away, and then you say you cut all the funny stories out. I'm thinking, where is this conversation going to go? So, David, I've got great respect for chief engineers, okay, in the shipping world of engineering, because when I worked as a controls engineer, I used to go and see lots of properties, commercial properties in London, and I always used to find some of the owners or the facilities manager or the maintenance manager. He would be a ex chief engineer. Now, what that guy knew about buildings was unbelievable, because you've got that building on water and you've got no resources, have you?
No.
If something breaks down, you've got to fix that with limited stock, with limited resource. You've got to keep that machine going. And right at the beginning of the meeting today, you mentioned the story about the water and how precious water is, because obviously I was just about to take some water. And that's interesting to know that we, as normal people, normal engineers, and I would say normal engineers, compared to you as an engineer, we wouldn't think that. You must have learned so much in them times regarding engineering.
I've been told by several people that what I have done and what I know is just truly formidable. But I'm also of that mindset that says to me, that tells me, always be open to learning new things.
Yeah.
Always be open to learning. So now, apart from what else I do, I study ancient history, I study ancient language, I write as well, which you might know about. So I've got a collection of short stories, plus a lot more besides that. I'm working on a much longer book, and I study specific things that happened in history, and I look at how things happened and why they happened. Because my old history master, who died, I think he would have died probably the early part of the century, when he took me through history when I was at school, he always hammered this. He says, always look at why this event or that event was important. What happened here? What happened there? Why is that important? And he always said to us, if you look at any event in history, look at the previous 50 years that were before that one thing you're scrutinizing, one thing you're looking at. And he was absolutely bang on. So the period of history I study that he took me through is a period of history from about 1875 to the outbreak of World War II in Europe. The whole of that period of history I still look at, I still read about. And those events, you might realize this, Paul, those events are shaping what's happening in the Ukraine now.
Yeah.
I still believe they are.
Yeah.
I believe they are. I don't think there's very much doubt in my mind about that. So I've been categorized as a somewhat pedantic but curious fellow, interested in minor things, which I happen to think are vastly important. Water, energy, how we get it, where we get it from, how it comes to us. These are all things that fascinate me totally. I totally get it. And I think we're doing so much wrong.
Yeah.
I do think we can do things a lot better. We're improving. But when you hear stories that I've heard about, for example, the ship that I heard about when I was at sea, and they arrived at the Panama Canal with very low water stocks because the desalination plant, which we didn't call desalination plant, we called it the evaporation plant, that's what it was not in a very good way. So they enter the locks at the Panama Canal, and you go up a staircase of locks, probably about 3 locks, and you go into this huge freshwater lake called the Gatun Lake. And they said, right, they got in there, and they said, right, we'll take all the water out that we've got, we'll put it into one tank, transfer it best we can, and they pumped the water from the lake straight into the tanks that were empty.
Right.
And that got them out of a hole.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because that being a steamship, you've got no water there. You ain't going anywhere.
No.
So you were always keeping an eye on A, how much water you were using in the steam plant, which was a critical factor.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also looking at how much water you're using on the domestic side.
Yeah.
How much water you're using to cook, to feed, to drink.
And what was the balance? What was the balance of that? The comparison between the two?
If you got away with using 8 tons, when I say tons, I mean old imperial tons.
Mm-hmm.
If you got away with using 8 tons of water a day, you were fortunate.
Well, and was that for domestic or for both?
That was for both.
Right.
So if your water consumption for your domestic consumption and for the steam plant consumption, if you get that down to 8 tons a day, so you have 8 watches in a day of 4 hours each. What did I say? No, 8 watches. No, there's six watches in a day. 6, 4, 24. That's right. So if you use say 2 tons of water in a watch, and a watch was 4 hours long, then if you just think about that one, 6 watches. But yeah, if you could get your water consumption down to 8 tons per day, both domestic and steam plant consumption, you were happy, because then you could shut down one of your 2 desalination plants, leave that standing, and you ran on the other one, and that supplied everything you needed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a situation where you had to run both desalination plants flat out to make up your losses, you were not in a good place.
No. So you had to become like an energy manager on site, on the boat itself, or ship, we should say.
Yeah. And
what year was this, David?
Right the way through from 1973 to 1988.
Right.
1988. So I packed up in 1988.
So the concept of energy management and saving, in this case, water, and did that work for the same for the likes of energy as well, your fuel and like diesel, etc.? And did that work for electricity charging, etc.? How did you manage that?
Good question. That's a very good question. If I can take you back to the first oil crisis of 1973, and I have a very personal memory of that one, because we were somewhere up in the North Pacific being thrown about in the middle of a typhoon that was burning itself out. And I came out of my cabin, and my cabin was just round the back from the chief engineer's quarters where he lived. And I came round the corner to walk past his cabin, and he came out of his cabin, met me in the alleyway, and he said, "Dave," he said, come in. He said, I've had a telex about something. I'll let you read it, see what you think. I want your ideas. What? So we sat down into the cabin, and he said, "Care for a beer?" I said, "Yeah, no problem." He showed me the telex. And the way things rolled out was that when the oil crisis actually hit, and oil prices then went through the roof, then the company's attitude was, prices of fuel are just going to go, which they did. The telex essentially said, monitor all your stocks of water, lubricating oil, fuel oil, or whatever. Don't sail around the world with partially empty fuel tanks. Bunker as and where you can, when you can. At the moment, we aren't concerned about price. Turn off electrical equipment that's not in use, all this sort of thing. Now to you and I, that might sound like a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I came to this little section in the telex, and I read this, and I said to the chief, I said, "Hang on, chief." I said, we can't turn electric motors off. He said, Why do you think that? I said, if you turn them off, I said, the reason they keep running is because while they're running, they get hot and they keep warm. I said, if we turn them off, the damp gets in, you turn them on again, bang, because the insulation value in the motor will drop through the floor. You got a burnt out motor.
Mm.
He said, he said, I thought about that and I think you're right. So electricity really on a vessel, the sort of vessel we were sailing on, not much of a problem. On a cruise liner, different. Water consumption on a cruise liner also is crucial. The likes of the QE2, the likes of a modern cruise liner floating about these days, that's nothing more than one great, huge floating hotel, is it, Paul?
Yeah, yeah.
And your water consumption is just through the roof. But if you go for a cruise and you're told by somebody, a floor walker in the cabin, who says, "Oh, you can only wash a certain number of times a day, you can only have a shower a certain number of times a day, and you can only flush that toilet in your cabin so many number of times a day," are you going to sail with them again?
No, you're not.
You're not there to be told how much water you can use.
Mm.
So the accent, what I worked for this company, was on fuel consumption for the propulsion of the vessel.
Yeah.
And I can give you a comparison. Because the first ships I sailed on were about 18,000 ton dead weight. And they were burning between 50 and 55 tons per day of fuel. Yeah, roughly. To keep that thing moving at that charter speed, you were burning anything between 45 to 55 tons per day of fuel. In 1987, I joined my first motor vessel, which I mentioned before. This thing was 150,000 tons dead weight. So you've gone from that to that.
Yeah.
But because it was a motor ship and because that plant was configured in a certain way, the fuel consumption was no more than 50 tons per day. The reason they had got that was because they had lowered the charter speed. It was a motor plant. The motor vessel has got a much lower specific fuel consumption than a steamship. And the other thing that we did was we used waste heat from the main engine to give us electric power.
Yeah.
And we also used the waste heat from the main engine to make us fresh water.
I was reading recently regarding the ships long term becoming electrified. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think we'll see that? Is it possible?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
It's a big ask, isn't it?
The reason my mind's working overtime, Paul, as I'm thinking about that. The reason I say that, and I have an illustration here which I can show you later on. The reason I say that is because when ships are designed to do this job, that job, whatever it might be, there is an allocation for the power and the propulsion machinery. Once that allocation starts increasing and moving into the cargo carrying space, that ship ceases to be economical.
Oh yeah.
So if you think about the batteries that will be needed to power that vessel,
and the solar possibly, that you'd use solar to charge the batteries, maybe.
Hopefully,
yeah.
But you would need to get that that facility for storing the energy within a certain percentage of the internal ship volume.
Yeah.
To make that viable. And I think we're a long way from that.
Yeah.
I think we're a long way from that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So
Shoot.
David, I'm interested. So you've gone through your do we say naval, your naval period where you've worked as a chief engineer. When did you make your transition? Because I know you as slightly something different. Did you transition from that?
Yeah. I never made it to chief. I was being considered for promotion, but at that time, that's when I made that life-changing decision.
Right.
Because I realized that if I let that go on so long, probably a lot of employers in this country would think more than twice about employing a person of that age.
Mm-hmm.
So when I packed up that life, when I packed up doing that, I was about 36,
Right.
roughly. So really, for employment ashore, that sort of thing, I was still a half decent prospect.
Yeah.
I tried working in industry, but I found that the way people work in industry and the way I thought, I've been trained and brought to think a certain way. And if you were to cut me open with a surgeon's knife and look at my spine, you'd find the name of my company all the way up it. Yeah?
Yeah,
A bit like Blackpool Rock.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're saying.
You're thought, you're trained, you are brought up to think in a certain way.
Yeah. It's installed in you, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But I did do some interesting stuff, and I went on the road selling for a company based in Harrogate. And that's when I realized that my people handling skills were actually quite limited. You think you know it all, but can you go into a place and just cold call on somebody and make a sale?
Mm.
Very few people can do that. But I did learn how to.
What was you selling, David?
There was a company in Harrogate, and they were making all sorts of systems and all sorts of materials and all sorts of products for the conservation of engineering equipment and assets and buildings and structure.
Right.
Again, it was all about conservation.
Yeah.
Keeping something going, repairing something, keeping it working, keeping it active, keeping it earning you money, doing a repair on that building that would enable you to let that stand for a little bit longer. It was all about energy again. It was all about conserving assets.
Yeah.
Doing something that would stop the ravages of production, the ravages of weather from destroying what was earning you the money to pay the wages of your workers, who people work for you.
Yeah.
So the company was called Belzona, and they were a very fast moving, very, very high tech company, and one of those companies that has got to keep moving, developing new products to keep moving and not stand still.
Mm.
So they were doing research in all sorts of areas, doing all sorts of things, and they developed a beautiful product for repairing flat roofs on buildings, and it was the first membrane roof system.
Right.
And that earned them a fortune.
Right.
So this product was made for solving the flat roof problem. Flat roofs are cheap. Pitched roofs on houses with tiles on, we see them all over the place. Yeah, that costs money. But the flat roof, oh, you stick a flat roof on, mate. That'll be all right. But as you know, in a roof structure, in the weather, hot and the cold, the roof moves.
Yeah.
Expansion and contraction. If you've got sunshine all the time, if you've got rain all the time, not a problem. We have both. And that causes roofs to move.
Yeah.
The membrane, actually, when you put the membrane on the roof, that membrane moved with the roof. Tiny, tiny, tiny fractions of an inch. But it moved sufficiently when it had cured to allow that surface to move. Absolute wizard of a product. But I worked for them for about a year. Wasn't selling, so I moved out of that. And I learned a lot.
Yeah,
I learned
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
about people,
yeah,
learning how to get on with people. And you've seen it, Paul. You've done it. You go into a place, and you have got to put yourself in that man's shoes for a while to try and see things where, from his point of view. My dad always said to me, he said, if a man asks you to walk a mile with him, then go with him too.
yeah,
Learn how to do that.
yeah.
And I did. And those lessons I haven't forgotten. And it's a lot of people might think, oh, David, don't be so bloody stupid. But it's the art of being humble, the art of being able to listen to what somebody tells you, the art of being able to listen to what somebody does. And somebody in that business said to me, he said, if you can leave a person in a better frame of mind than the one he was in when you met him, he won't forget you.
Mm. Very good point.
He
So
said, if you could, yeah.
go on. So there he
Shoot,
was.
go on.
There he was, David on the road. He was in the ship in the water, and is now on the road.
Yeah.
Where did that take you?
Well, I left Belzone. I went into industry for a while, and I found myself working for a plastics recycling company. They've gone now. So you move from Belzona, conservation of assets and equipment and machinery, into plastics recycling. What?
What year was this, David?
1989. Yeah, 1989.
Right. I'm intrigued that we was recycling at this time.
Yeah.
Leading edge initiatives.
I think. Let me think about this now, because the recycling industry probably had started, and it was realized, I stand to be corrected here, it was realized that of all the things that we make and produce as a society, or whatever, plastic appears to be the most the easiest thing you can recycle, but it isn't.
No,
It isn't.
we don't seem to be making it an easy job, do we?
No, and because of the volatile nature, the volatile nature of the plastic scrap market, it's a difficult industry to get into and survive in.
Right.
Because your prices of plastic per ton, which is scrap, which goes on the market and it gets sold and bought by compounders, plastics, people that make plastic products, the price is up and down like this.
Mm.
If you imagine the FTSE and what that's been doing over the past year or so, you've got price fluctuations in plastics, and you've got to be watching them like a hawk throughout the week.
Yeah.
And you can have a plastic grade, which is essentially recycled plastic. So it's been used, it's been through one use, and it could be up there 1 minute and down the next. So you've got to get the time just right when you can buy that, when you think, yeah, I'll have some of that, and I can make that from it, get that out the door, flog it,
Yeah.
and make money on it. But it was realized at the time as well, car batteries, there was a huge amount of scrap that was being generated through the scrapping of car batteries.
Right.
This car battery plastic, as it was, is about as close to virgin grade as you can get.
Right.
And that's why battery scrap was so valuable. But even that price is up and down like that.
Yeah.
And while I was working either for Belzona or for this company, I went to a car battery recycling plant.
Okay.
And they were making money hand over fist. And they were still active in 1988, 89, but they've been wiped out. The factory's gone now.
Right.
It is now big business.
Yeah.
And my partner, Sandy, she used to be a health and safety auditor
Hmm.
working for a company that was doing recycling and waste management, waste handling. The waste handling and waste industry in this country around the world is just astronomical. There's money everywhere in what's moving around the world in what you and I might call waste, but to somebody else is thinking, wow, I'll have some of that. I can use that. And we are getting smarter at it. We're getting smarter at how we reuse resources, how we reuse products that once 30, 40 years ago, you just chuck it away.
Yeah.
You are aware, aren't you, that in this country where we are fast running out of landfill?
Yeah. I can. I've got a landfill near me, and I can see the mountain building on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And it's quite nerving, really, because there once wasn't a mountain. We are now going up and up and up. And I posted some pictures of it recently. I was shocked the other day, and I look back and I see this. Where's that come from? And you can see where it's slowly building up. So the landfill is now becoming a mound, a landfill mound as such. It's quite scary, isn't it?
So you know what they will do with that when it's no longer usable?
Well, we've got a place round the corner from here that they've turned it into a park.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they do to it, or is there something else?
A park certainly, or a local amenity where you can take your kids or whatever, this sort of thing, landscape it, terrific, great. But
Yeah.
before that, they put a membrane over the top.
Right.
So they put a membrane over that entire cap of waste.
Yeah.
And from that, they can pull methane out.
Yeah.
That's what they'll do.
Right. And what do they do with the methane? Excuse my ignorance.
The methane will then go to you could actually inject that into the national grid using something called a GEP or a GEP. Now, GEP simply means grid entry point.
Right.
That's the language that they use. And you can, using a gas compressor, you can inject that gas direct into the grid.
Right. And that will blend in with it?
Yes, because it's methane.
Yeah.
Because our gas system is just about pure methane. It wasn't always like that, but it is now.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be in the future, but the other thing that can be done with that, and this is also happening at now waste recycling, sewage handling plant.
Yeah.
They are extracting the methane from the sewage. That gets pumped into a gas bubble. From that, they use that to run a couple of engines.
Yeah.
Which are diesel engines running on gas.
Yeah. I've seen that.
What that then does, that powers the entire utility, which takes it off the national grid.
Yeah.
So this is technically energy from waste.
They could actually spill that into the grid, couldn't they? And provide some form of export as such.
That's right. So you've got the methane, which is technically a waste product, but very valuable, very usable. Put that back into the grid. The same thing you can do with a biodigester as well. Or you can use the methane direct or use a methane in diesel engines.
So, David, why are we not seeing some more of that? Have you got a theory on why we don't? Like, for instance, yes, I've got a landfill that I can see in the distance to where I live. Mm-hmm. I can see there's no methane being generated there because sometimes you get the flame, don't you?
That's right.
Yes. We used to have a flame, but that used to be that's another story. That's another plant, but that's all closed down now. So why are we not seeing more of this generation? What's stopping us from taking advantage of this?
I think we're seeing more and more and more of these things called energy from waste plants. And they are growing in number. So because of the landfill diminishing in Britain, which it is, come the day in the future, there will be no more landfill left.
Yeah.
And my partner said, she said as much. A landfill site, the likes of which is growing near you, over a period of 20 years, that has to be managed because it will leach out waste products.
Yeah.
They've got to be monitored, looked at, measured. They have to put in mitigating measures to curb it. But the energy from waste industry is growing. There are more energy from waste plants which are generating power, which is going to the grid, burning waste that we produce. There are more and more biodigesters being built. If I can just give you an indication of something about what's happening, I used to drive an awful lot on the M62, which is between Liverpool and Hull, and there were 3 power stations on that motorway. There was, if you're driving east, you would hit Eggborough first, then you would come to Ferry Bridge. Then the next one you would see further back on the horizon was Drax.
Right.
Drax was the last coal-fired power station that we built in this country, I believe.
Yeah, and the biggest.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And I've been inside it. It is just...
It's funny, I was invited to go up there a couple of years ago, but I didn't get there.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have gone there.
Oh, I was shown around the plant. It's just like, oh, what, So think about the boilers I sailed with. They're toys compared to what they've got over there. So if you look at what's happened now, Eggborough power station's been flattened. That's gone.
Yeah. Ferry Bridge is gone.
Yes, it has done.
It was recently, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Because my partner and I were up there recently, and I thought, where are those cooling towers gone?
Yeah. And
they've been, taken down. But there are now 2 huge energy from waste plants there.
Right.
They're absolutely massive.
Yeah.
And Drax is not what it used to be, but I think there's a mix of things going on there. And they're also, I think they're using biomass.
Right.
But because of the size of the site, that's probably going to be if you like, a research power station to see what works.
Yeah.
Because of the size of it. When Drax was working, they were using the heat from the cooling towers that condense the steam to pump through greenhouses.
Right.
There was a huge tomato farm up there.
Okay.
And they're using it to grow tomatoes.
That's good.
Yeah.
I like it when we're utilizing all the efficiencies from power. That's very key. Yeah. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
So I don't know what year it was, but I went to Tilbury Power Station,
right,
which is no longer there, but they were mixing coal and biomass to bring their renewables down. To add to their renewable obligations as a percentage during that time. But that's obviously closed down now.
Yeah.
Where I live, so I live on the Thames, and I can see the power stations, the Kings North and Grain. And one morning, we knew they would stop running and they would started to decommission, etc. And I used to look out my window every morning, could see Kings North Power Station from my window. And I had this meeting. It was right near Kings North Power Station. I thought, oh, it's interesting. I'm going to look at the chimney when I come out. And then we're in this meeting and there's all this excitement. And they said, oh, it's down. And I said, what's down? They blew the chimney up that day and I didn't even know about it. And we went out and it wasn't there. The biggest landmark out of my window and throughout the whole of that coast went. It was, and the community complained when it went up, apparently, this power station. When it was built, they hated it. But they had more complaints when they blew it up and pulled it down because it would become a landmark,
Yes. Yeah.
Crazy times.
Well,
So David, look, I'm really conscious that we've talked about some really key, interesting things here for our audience. You've totally curveballed me, as I would normally say, because I thought we was going to talk more about education and your training. Let's get into that. Let's talk about what for me, you've been given back. Tell us about your stints regarding instructing and teaching.
I got into the FE system in about 2004, 2005, because I'd been made redundant. I was an engineering inspector for about 10 years. So that took me on the road. That was inspecting power plant machinery and all this sort of thing. And I moved into FE, and I've been in and out of that ever since. Since that time, I'll leave out the early years, but I began to specialize in 3 areas, all electrical, all fascinating. There was electrical installation, power distribution, electrical engineering, and electronics.
Right. I was going to ask you, I presumed you was more mechanical. What is your background? Is it mechanical and electrical? Both. Yeah. Right. That's quite unique.
Because the company I worked for was the only fleet that used their engineers to do both activities in the engine room.
Right.
Nearly every other company, in fact, I would say every other company, they employed an electrician from ashore to come and do that for them.
Yeah.
And when I was at the end of my days with the oil company I worked for all those years, who put me through that apprenticeship, I finally learned why they did that. You'll find this interesting, because I was in this huge room on the Isle of Man, in this hotel, and we were all sat there, great big room like that. Presentation team down here, captains, chief engineers, second engineers, chief officers, all down there like that. And there's me with that lot. And somebody asked the question, why did this company decide to have one of their engineers learn how to and work within the electrical systems on the ships that we operate? And one of the presentations, team began talking. He said, "It's quite simple, gentlemen," he said. "We couldn't have an electrician from ashore coming onto one of our ships and talking to the chief engineer in a language that the chief engineer couldn't understand."
Good point.
Yeah. And I just sat back and I just went, got it. I met a number of people who had been electrical engineers at sea, and they knew they could run circles around the chief and get that man right where they wanted him. In other words, you don't run this show, pal, I do.
Yeah.
He said, this man said we couldn't have somebody on the ship talking a language nobody else understood.
Yeah.
And that's how and why I got into it. So I was familiar with 3-phase systems right from my very earliest days. I just grew comfortable with it.
Right.
You know, there are sparkies out there who are doing installation work, and they think and they believe that 3-phase electricity is a black art because they don't know how it works. They've never seen it, never worked with it. They have never been with and worked with 3-phase systems. Yet some of them are delivering apprenticeships and working in college, and they're talking about a system, talking about an industry, they're talking about an engineering discipline that they don't understand and don't know about, but they're trying to teach kids how to do it.
Yeah.
Now, does that strike you as slightly odd?
Slightly, yeah. More than slightly.
Yeah. Do you find it's like yeah?
What sort of subjects were you teaching when you was doing your college, etc.?
I was doing, well, of course, it was health and safety, and then doing the science work as well, the science bit. Then the teaching these lads how to actually complete and design an electrical installation.
Right.
So you take them through all that lot, you take them through all the theory, and then you teach them how to understand the legislation that goes with it, so they can navigate all the obstacles they need to know. And I'd be the first person to sit here, Paul, and say to you that I learned, and I'm still learning, a lot about not just this industry, that industry, but a lot about myself, how you communicate with people, how you empathize with people. I've had my confrontations, I've had my ups and downs in this lot, and I've tried to knock a few heads together. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. But you and I both know that in this country we've got a dire skill shortage, which we are not addressing. We're nowhere near addressing it. And some of the best apprentices I've worked with, Paul, have been young women.
Right. That's interesting.
Young women. They take one look at that lot and say, I'm having some of that.
I've had quite a few ladies on my podcast, and someone commented to me the other day and said that he finds that when I'm interviewing the female expert, that there's more passion there. There's more, more need for driving the energy management story and the expert side of it.
Yep.
I'm not putting the pressure on you now, but that's what he was saying. And I get that. The students I work with, they're all passionate, regarding energy management, and I get that more from the lady than the man.
One little story here about an encounter I had when I was an engineering inspector. The old term for that was engineer surveyor. So I got sent up to a place in the north of England, and it was a facility owned by Northwest Water. Was it Northeast Water? No. And these water companies, they hold bulk chlorine in various sites for the chlorination of the water. So the chlorine tanks that they use they're huge, great big cylindrical tanks, and they have to be inspected every 5 years or so, which means emptying them, making them gas-free, safe for entry. Then someone like me went along, crawled around them, looked at them, making notes in his notebook, this sort of thing, looking at the internal condition, the external condition, checking all the fittings, checking all the fixtures, asking a few questions. You go away, and out of that comes a report. Right? I turn up at this facility where they've got these 2 chlorine tanks. There's a little one as well, which they want me to go into. And there were 2 young women in there who were the engineers on site. And I was intrigued, fascinated, completely absorbed by the fact that when they worked together, their desks faced each other. And I thought, have you ever seen 2 men work like that?
No.
And I just thought, very rarely. So I walked in and I said, oh, good morning, ladies. How are you? I said, oh, hello, David. Pleased to meet you. Like some tea or coffee or whatever? I said, yes, sit down. Yeah, here's a chair. And I watched these 2. And it was like 2 minds working as one. I've never seen anything like it in my life. They were just sat there looking at things and asking me a few questions and then talking together like that. And then Dave, what do you think about that? And I'd come in and say, yeah, okay. These 2 were just bouncing things off each other. And I was aware of this enormously powerful intelligence that was comprised of these 2 individuals. And they were producing something that was greater than some of their parts.
Yeah.
It was like 1 + 1 = 3 or 4 instead of 2. they just worked so well together. And I have never seen that since. So
Interesting.
lady engineers, people like that, passionate about conservation. Oh yeah, let's have it.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I do think we do need to do things differently. I do
Totally
believe we
agree.
do.
So, David, it's been awesome listening to you. And I'm going to put you on a spot. How can I put you on the spot? You know, you're not, you rise to everything, I'm sure. So I'm going to put you on a spot now, though. And I'm going to say to you, it's come to that time where, is there anything that you can give back to the industry from your vast experience for our audience today as a takeaway?
I've got two little exhibits I'd like to show you.
Right. How are we going to get that audible, though?
No, one's a book.
Ah, okay. Go on in. Let's see how it goes. The Waste Makers. Okay. Tell us about that.
This is an absolutely seminal text. So my father bought this in 1961. And it's written by a fellow called Vance Packard. Now, Vance Packard was an American writer, but he cottoned on to what was happening in America. So he wrote this book, I think. It's the first edition. So first published 1961. So he's writing at the end of a period of American history when he realizes that America alone probably needs 3 Earths to sustain it.
Right.
And he's the first one to realize and write about the waste that's been generated, which is profligate. It's almost criminal.
Yeah.
And I have a second device as well, which I want to show you.
So what year was that written, that book? 1971, did you say?
60. My father bought this 61.
Oh, sorry, 61.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. And that was published the previous year.
Right.
But what Vance Packard in his story, with his, and I hate reading from text, but he tells a story about how the American industrial machine, which kicked into overdrive during World War II, couldn't be stopped, and they had to keep producing and making things.
Right.
And this is what led to the World War II saw some pretty phenomenal industrial developments. I think you'd agree with that.
Yeah, totally.
And he talks about how this lot and these processes and these materials and these inventions found their way into the American way of life. But it also generated a huge amount of waste as well. And I just been looking through here today before you and I met online. And I'm still reading little bits in here and I'm thinking, wow, that's just incredible.
Yeah,
He's talking about things here that are pertinent to us now.
Yeah.
So I would say to your listeners, your readers, to read that book.
Yeah. Okay.
It's an absolute must, because he talks about things here that are relevant to us now.
Mm.
The other thing I have is this.
Ooh. So that's a TV valve, isn't it?
This is.
I'm showing my age now.
So
for the benefit of our audience today, listening to audio, David's just showed an old valve that used to sit inside a TV, I believe. He's going to
something very like it.
Okay.
Yeah, something very, very, very like that. This is a little bit more specialized. There's a label on it. I can tell you all about this thing. And this is straight from the BBC, from their engineering stores.
Wow.
And this was made by a company, used to operate not far from you, Paul. The company was called AC Cossell.
Are they in Chelmsford?
There might have been.
Yeah.
There might have been. But these people they were at the forefront of radar development in World War II.
Marconi.
Yeah. So this is all this thing does is rectify a power supply.
Right.
It's just called a fermionic diode.
Yeah.
That's all it is. Nothing more fancy than that. But if you can just imagine this thing here and what we can do now on little silicon chips, and you can get 50 of them on your finger, on your fingernail. We've gone from that in, I know how old this is. This is probably about 1950.
Wow.
Still works.
Have you got lots of these little gadgets around?
I got probably 2 or 3 of these, but I sold stacks of them in an auction. They've just taken up so much space. But even now, I find these things just totally fascinating.
Yeah.
If you like, I'll get my white coat and you can take me as mad scientist.
David, it's crazy because I'm going to tell the audience how we met. Okay, so yeah. In my early posting days in 2019, it may have been more early 2020. I think I posted about nuclear power. I was putting stories out there. The only person I get loads of people saying, "Oh, that's really good. You're doing good work." One person used to always challenge me, and that person used to be David. And I would spend hours answering, because again, for the benefit of the audience, it's me that answers everything. Okay. And so David had put an essay on my comments. I'd have to give back. He was relentless, everything. And in the end, I had to phone him up and we had to have a conversation and talk about it. And luckily he calmed down after a while because he didn't put so many essays on my, I think he got bored with me, but yeah, he's an amazing person for knowledge. As you can see from today's podcast, he's exceeded the time.
Yeah.
Which is great. So what was sorry, you've thrown me a little bit now. What was the story regarding this technology, the valve? What's
this one?
Yeah. So what we're giving back there?
Something looking very much like that was developed in World War One.
Right.
And it was called the Audion. And it was a fermionic valve looking very much like that, but it was used in radios and home radios, which were developed in World War One. So during World War One and World War Two, there were huge advances in technology. And this Audion valve, this one comes much later. So the Audion valve is a valve used in an amplifier that can amplify a signal. Was brand new then, in its infancy. People just starting to get used to the idea of listening to a radio broadcast in their front rooms at home.
Right.
But the whole monumental construction of Western technology and commerce just came crashing down, as you know, in 1929, because there was a surplus of everything.
Right. Back to
and this was just one tiny part of it.
Right.
And I could probably talk to you for hours about something called the entropy law. But I don't know. Maybe that's another time. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I've always had at the back of my mind this thing called the entropy law in everything I do and everything I think about. And sometimes I don't always follow it, but I think, hang on a minute. But one simple example, a little while ago, we had to move a shed. And we realized we had to have a concrete base for it. That means pouring concrete. I don't like concrete, but to pour the concrete, I had to make a wooden shuttering for it, a frame, if you like, to pour the concrete into. Paul, when I bought the wood for that shuttering, it worked out at £40 a cubic foot.
It's a lot of money.
That's astronomical.
Mm.
A lot of money.
Just for shuttering.
Just for shuttering.
Mm.
So I thought, well, I can't just scrap this wood after taking the shuttering away. So what I now do is, if I got stuff like that, that gets put to one side and reused for something else.
Mm.
I do something else with it. I might do something with that. Yeah. But if you want me to say something to your audience, what I would say is read that book. It's absolutely monumental in scope, content. The mind of this man is just incredible. And also consider that we are getting smarter at using things better. We are getting smarter at using energy better. But we have to also understand what this thing is that I've just called entropy, what it actually is. And that essentially says that there's no such thing as renewable energy. The first law of thermodynamics says energy can only be changed into one form or another, but it can't be created or destroyed. If you start using the term renewable energy, you think about energy being created, and you are creating it. Yeah. The second law of thermodynamics says that in a closed system or a universe, that the entropy in that universe, the energy of that universe is a constant, but the entropy is also increasing, which means to say that all the energy in that universe, in that system, is being turned into entropy. Entropy increases, and you can't get it back. It's like a bank. You can put money into that bank, but you can't draw money from it. You can't draw the energy back from it. Energy that we use today, the way we use energy now, from the source of energy that we use, it probably goes through one or two conversions, and after that, it's useless. We've lost it.
Disappears, yeah.
That goes into that bank that we call the entropy bank, and we can't get that back. But at the same time, look all around the world, we are learning how to use what's in this world, what's on this earth for energy. We're learning how to do it. I think that the way things are going, we've got this incredible system called the national grid for gas. I think eventually what's going to happen is that will turn into not a methane grid, but a hydrogen grid.
Yeah.
Now, if you're going back to when you and I were younger, we had something called town gas, which was a mix of gases. That gas system now is just about all methane. But you've got that system in place. It's all there. But I think eventually we'll move to hydrogen, the hydrogen grid. How do we get hydrogen? Electrolysis. Where does the energy for that come from? Well, how about solar PV?
Yeah.
So is there a possibility that every home in the country, maybe, just maybe, having with solar panels on the roof, will be electrolyzing water to produce hydrogen to put into the grid? Is that possible? That's what some people are talking about.
Yeah. I think we're a long way off from that. We are. We're a long way from that. But I think that's coming. If you think back to our earliest conversations, and I mentioned to you those two ships that used to tie up at Canvey Island. Yeah.
So I was on those. I worked on them. When they began carrying gas from North Africa, from a terminal in Algiers, the original contract was 20 years duration. Shortly after those ships entered service, one in 63 and one in 64, or round about that time, shortly after that point in time, North Sea gas was found off Great Yarmouth.
Yeah.
And those two ships were in service by that time. The promise then, when that gas was discovered, that we would have a gas reserve for how many years? Untold numbers of years.
Mm.
And what's happened to that gas reserve?
Disappeared.
I guess it is probably just about all used up.
Mm.
So our problem in this country is A, keeping the country going, and B, having something called security of supply.
Yeah. Good point.
And this is something people forget. Oh, you can do that, you can do that, you can do that, you can put this in, you can put that there, you can do that. So can you be certain that that supply is secure? Mr. Packard mentions that in his book.
Right. In 1960.
In 1960, he was saying that then.
Wow.
Be careful who you team up with.
Right. David, thank you very much for today. It's been a real pleasure. I've got some ideas. I'm going to talk to you offline about them shortly, but I'd like to thank you for your time today. Very, very valuable. I'm praying that someone's going to pick up on some of those great words and wisdom you've given us today. So I'm definitely going to go and research that book, and I'm urge my listeners to do that as well. So thank you very much, David, today.
Paul, it's been great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you,
please,
Paul.
you and your family stay safe in these times.
Oh, damn right we will. Take care, Paul.
Take care.
Bye-bye.